a team that is growing, and we're very happy to have you all here to discuss a very critical issue for the Caribbean. We're here to hang out and discuss basically the current landscape of the Sargassum crisis that is occurring in the Caribbean region. We will be live tweeting this event, so if you want to chime in, please use the hashtag Climate Tracker Hangout. So now we're going to have a brief presentation from each of our speakers, and we have a really nice lineup of speakers this for this session. We're going to hear about their insights on what's going on around the situation of the Sargassum crisis in our region. And first of all, I want you to join me in welcoming Francisca Elma to the front. Dr. Francisca Elma, she is a scientific project manager at Seafield Solutions Limited, which is a startup that is developing sargassum cultivation for products and carbon sequestration. I always get tied up with that word. Prior to this, she was teaching marine sciences at Schools of Field Studies in South Caicos and at CIEE Bonaire. In 2018, she started researching sargassum and its impact on seagrass beds. For her PhD, she studies coral recruitment, calcification, and bioerosion on the reef. A lot of long words that I think she's going to go into in her presentation and explain what all of this really means for us. In 2020, Francisca took a climate change sabbatical and became a climate activist. Hear more about what she has to say in her talk, TED Talk, how a marine biologist turned the climate pirate. That sounds really interesting. Since 2021, she's one of the co-hosts of the Sargassum podcast. So I'm very happy to welcome you, Francisca, to the floor to take over and tell us a little bit more about your experience with Sargassum research and directly your hands-on approach to dealing with the crisis in the region.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for inviting me and for the nice introduction. I'm going to share some slides to tell everybody a bit more about sargassum and how it's impacting the region. I myself am currently living in Mexico, which is one of the regions who is also impacted quite a lot. So yeah, it's a daily struggle for me and for probably a lot of you who are living in the Caribbean. So first of all, I want to share with you the 4 different perspectives that the University of Southampton put together that people can have of sargassum. And probably each of you, if you know a bit about sargassum or have seen it, you will have one of these perspectives. But it's also possible to have multiple at the same time. For example, I agree with all of these perspectives, and but of course, depending on where the sargassum is, it's a different perspective. So some people see sargassum as an emergent threat, so as a problem for their country, for their island, for their community. Others see the sargassum more as a rainforest of the sea, so they see all the positive things that the sargassum does when it's out in the ocean and the really good ecosystem it is. Again, others see sargassum as a lucrative resource. They see all the products you can make out of sargassum, and they are starting to make companies around it who start using it. And the company I work for, and a lot of other people as well, also see sargassum as a climate change mitigation tool through carbon sequestration. So as a way to sequester carbon from the atmosphere.
Hey, brother, hear me now. Brother, dog. Know me, understand.
Sargassum to me, something to look at.
Something that I can see from space.
It's an amazingly diverse and really important and unique habitat.
Providing a hunting ground for those big fish.
My goal is to find an oceanic white-tip shark, a hammerhead shark, something like that.
The baby sea turtle go to the Sargasso Sea.
Cette mystérieuse mer des Sargasses.
que je n'ai jamais vues.
Once it gets to the shore and gets to the beach, it becomes a huge problem.
Because they fill up bays where there's no oxygen in the water anymore and everything there is just dying.
Et ces sargasses peuvent donc se retrouver contaminés en chlordécone.
H2S, l'ammoniac et l'arsenic inorganique. Et ces produits sont toxiques pour ceux qui sont dans les zones d'impact.
For resort properties, obviously, besides the image impact, the guest experience impact, the smell, there's the cost.
And it's a sign of disrupted ocean ecosystem.
Telling us, I've been proliferating because of you, now do something about it.
So we do have the Citizen Science Project ready. Anyone can use it.
Satellites to detect the presence and the position on Sargassum on a daily basis.
En 4 etapas: la contención, recolección, disposición y la industrialización.
Todos nuestros productos son hechos 100% de sargasso.
Le côté ignifuge ou le côté résistance à l'eau naturel, je parle naturel.
We can extract and we can refine seaweed by minimizing, if not outright avoiding in some cases, turning that biomass back into CO2.
Whether we can turn this golden tide into a golden opportunity.
You know, cultivating these seaweeds as gardens, as new kinds of gardens in the ocean, is going to provide a whole new era in human civilization.
So as you could hear, our podcast guests had a lot to say about sargassum. And as you could hear, it's also a multilingual podcast because the region is multilingual. So we interview people in French and in Spanish as well as in English. And now I want to tell you a bit more about the social and the environmental impact sargassum has. This is a picture from Playa del Carmen, where I live, from a few years ago. This was before COVID, so they're not wearing masks because of COVID, but they're actually wearing this to protect themselves from the hydrogen sulfide and the other gases that come off the sargassum when it's rotting. So when the sargassum has been on the beach for longer than 48 hours, it becomes very smelly. And it's actually really bad for your health. It can make your eyes water. It can make your lungs hurt, your throat hurt. You can get a headache from it. You can vomit from it. And there's also some long-term impacts close to like asthma, etc., that are researched now in the French Caribbean. But there's also other impacts. There's a lot of environmental impacts. When the sargassum fills up bays, it takes out all the oxygen in the water, and that can lead to fish dying. It can lead to turtles having to be rescued or otherwise dying if they're in those bays. It also leads to seagrasses dying. So the brown water that sometimes happens when the sargassum accumulates and rots on the beaches is very bad for adjacent ecosystems such as seagrasses, coral reefs, mangroves. But also sometimes the sargassum goes back into the ocean and you have a really thick layer of sargassum that lays on top of your seagrass. In South Caicos, in the Turks and Caicos Islands, that layer was sometimes like 20 to 30 centimeters thick. I could put my whole hand in and I could see my elbow, and then you have only stumps of seagrass left. So really the nice, clear Caribbean water is gone, which those ecosystems need to thrive. But also because the nice, clear Caribbean water is gone and you have a beach full of algae and brown water and smelly, the tourists are also gone. Or they start complaining and they ask for the hotels to take the sargassum away, which is very, very costly. At the same time, locals also like to use the beach. It's a really big place for social gatherings all over the region. And at least in Mexico, people do not use the beach when there's too much sargassum on it. So we're losing a place where we can do our social gatherings. As I said, the arsenic is a big bad. the hydrogen sulfide is a big problem, but also the sargassum, it's like a sponge out in the ocean, and it collects arsenic. In the French islands, it collects chlordecone, which is a really harmful fertilizer they used for a while and is still now accumulated in the waters, and you cannot fish in those waters. So in some ways, the sargassum is cleaning up the mess we made to the ocean. However, it means that the sargassum arriving to the shores has those things in it, which makes it difficult to dispose of it or make some products out of it, because if you just put the sargassum in a landfill, these things can sift through the soil and maybe even get into your groundwater. And if you make products, you have to make sure those products are safe and that you're taking out those bad things that you don't want in your products. Other big impacts is that electronics start corroding faster because of the hydrogen sulfide. And that means people have to replace their fridges, their air conditionings if they live close to the beach. So there's a lot of impacts there. Fishermen are also impacted. They do like sargassum as a place to fish out in the ocean. However, if their bay where they keep their boats is full of sargassum and they can't go out, or they do fishing, spear fishing, and they are in the sargassum and they get rashes because they have to swim through it, then it's really bad for fishermen. And in Barbados, the flying fishing, which is their one fisheries they had, completely collapsed because flying fish cannot fly through the sargassum. So they had to change to amberjack fishing. So there's a lot of changes happening for the people living in the Caribbean because of the sargassum being there. But we also have learned how to manage sargassum. So we learned that we can see the sargassum from space. And there's a lot of prediction tools who can tell you where the sargassum is right now and where it's going to end up, so that you have a bit of an idea of how that if something comes to your island or not. Then we have come up with a lot of different ways of collecting the sargassum. The best way you can see up in the left corner. So if there's not too many waves, a barrier and a boat collection is the best way to collect the sargassum. It doesn't take away the sand from the beach. The sargassum is still fresh, and you don't have any impacts of the sargassum being on the beach, which locals and tourists don't like. If there's small amounts, as a raker, as you can see at the bottom, or raking it by hand is also possible. But unfortunately, sometimes there's a lot of sargassum on the beach, and the only way it can be removed is with heavy machineries, which of course highly impact the beach as well and take a lot of sand. Unfortunately, most of that sargassum that we collect, and of course the collection costs money, ends up just in a landfill somewhere and rotting away or drying away, but we haven't found that many uses for it, or we have found many uses, but they're still in a starting phase of actually starting businesses around those uses. So here are a few of the uses of sargassum, and this is really the positive part or the other side of the coin, because while now it's still, sargassum is still a really big nuisance, we can turn this into opportunity and into a blue economy for the Caribbean. So you can make sargassum paper, you can make fertilizers and biostimulants for plants. You can make compost. You just have to make sure that the arsenic content is not too high. In the Dominican Republic, they make single-use plates from yucca and sargassum. In Mexico, a guy made a whole house, actually now several houses, from clay and sargassum bricks. And another Mexican company used recycled plastic and sargassum for shoes. And they also make soaps in Mexico from sargassum, which is a really, really nice soap. And FAO in 2020 brought out a really good guide that showed what you can make out of sargassum and also how much you can make out of 1 ton of sargassum. So this shows even more things. So you can also make energy and biofuels and fuikondant, which is a natural remedy against a lot of illnesses. And you can, what else have we not talked about? Sea bales, you can potentially give it to sheep. Again, watch out for the arsenic, or grow mushrooms in there. Activated carbon or charcoal to actually filter water and filter bad things out of the water is also something that's really useful. In Barbados, they actually found out a way to make fossil fuel-free biogas for cars. So they use the water from the rum distilleries, the wastewater, and the sargassum. And with that, they can have biogas for cars. And they hope to, by 2030, that the whole island is fossil fuel free, and that they can convert a lot of the cars to sargassum powered cars, which would be really, really cool. One thing that a lot of people forget as well is that sargassum takes up CO2 and sequesters it to the deep sea when it sinks naturally. The problem is when the sargassum gets on the beach, that CO2 goes back into the air as methane, as in CO2. So nothing of that CO2 that was sequestered actually stays in the long cycle, but it actually goes straight back to the atmosphere. So the company I work for wants to find a way to take more of that sargassum and sink it to the deep sea, so that we can have that CO2 sequestered for long term and help sequester CO2 out of the atmosphere and lock it in for thousands of years. Thank you so much for listening to me. I know the presentation was brief, but if you want to hear more, you can listen to the Sargassum podcast. We have now almost 60 interviews with experts and locals from all walks of life. And I also want to thank our sponsor from the podcast, which is LACC's U.S. Department of Education Title VI grant, and also Seafields, who makes it possible for me to do this work.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for joining us and for sharing both sides of the coin. I mean, looking and seeing how, you know, some countries are taking the crisis and making positive efforts out of it, I think is really a crucial part of telling the full story for our audience, which is made up mostly of journalists, right? People who want to tell the Sargassum story. So thank you so much for showing us both sides of the coin. And I really like that line that mentioned turning the golden tide into a golden opportunity. That's really interesting. So I would really like for you, Francisca, if you can share a link to your podcast with us in the chat, so that our participants can take a listen and maybe subscribe to the podcast. That would be really great. So I'm going to move on now to our second guest, and our second guest speaker is Christopher Corbin. Christopher is a coordinator of the United Nations Environment Program, and he's based in Kingston, Jamaica. He assumed these duties as of September 1st, 2022. Chris has been with UNEP since September 2004 as a secretariat in the capacity of program manager for its assessment of management of environmental pollution sub-program. Since 2015, he's also managed the Secretariat's Communication, Education, Training, and Awareness sub-program and facilitated the development and co-authored the region's first regional marine litter action plan and regional marine litter strategy, as well as the first State of the Convention area report on marine pollution. Christopher is a St. Lucian national born in Barbados. Interesting. and has 30 years of national and regional program and project management experience and has been involved in several intergovernmental processes and discussions for improving ocean governance and water resource management in the wider Caribbean. So Christopher, I'm actually personally very excited to hear from you because I know a lot about the work that you've done. But first of all, before you jump into your presentation, tell us a little bit about this St. Lucia, Barbados, Jamaica situation. Like, where are you really from and where is it?
No, for any of us who are from the Caribbean, you know we get very territorial. I was born in Barbados. I have Barbadian family, but I grew up in St. Lucia. I consider St. Lucia home, but every time I travel to Barbados, it helps to be a Barbadian. When I go back to St. Lucia, it helps to be a St. Lucian. And for some reason, the accents are all mixed up now. So even when I go to Trinidad, people tell me welcome home. So
yeah, you sound a little Trini to me. So.
Yeah. So first of all, let me really applaud the organizers. First of all, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit on some perspectives that we have at the regional level in terms of Sargassum and some of the work that has been going on by different governments relating to Sargassum and the management of Sargassum in general. So I think as we've heard from the previous speaker, that Sargassum in the open ocean and pelagic Sargassum is in fact beneficial. And the challenge really occurs when we have this large influx, as we like to refer to it, of quantities of Sargassum, which end up then being stranded on our beaches, on our coastlines. And that is where you have a significant negative impact on human health, on economies, in particular, our tourism sector, and a number of our coastal and marine ecosystems. And Francisca shared a little bit in terms of things like the impacts of hydrogen sulfide, the impacts on fishing, as in the case of Barbados. So this really is a concern. And as a result of that, I would say that over the last few years, there's almost been a mushrooming of different products, publications, analyses, and we have done very much the same. We've worked with a number of regional experts who have produced a number of papers and documents and resources which really help describe the issue, helps journalists, helps the general public understand what is Sargassum, what are the concerns, and some of the language that has been mentioned before, turning the golden tide. How do policymakers deal with Sargassum? How can it generate business and entrepreneurship at a national level? So a lot of these resources are available. I'd certainly encourage as many persons as possible to look at them. They have some really good science, but some of them are also written in terms that everyone can understand. What has also happened is that over the last few years, a number of platforms and meetings and workshops and tools have been developed focusing specifically on Sargassum. And you've heard a bit from Francisca now of the efforts to actually try to provide countries with early warning using satellites to determine where the Sargassum is moving. Is it likely to impact on particular countries, on particular beaches? And she's completely right in saying that the best way of dealing with it is to prevent it from getting on the beach in the first place. And that too is challenging, because now when it hits our coastal and marine areas and our beaches is where you have significant challenges. But there have been a number of conferences. There was a regional conference, an international conference in Guadeloupe. There have been a number of projects. What I also want to highlight here is that Sargassum, while not yet considered a global problem, is definitely one that's not unique to the Caribbean. And we have collaborated with colleagues in West Africa who have very similar challenges in Sargassum. So this really is an opportunity to have cooperation across the Atlantic. And the World Maritime University, in fact, had an event in Dominica recently, where again, the focus was on Sargassum. How can we deal with it as a region, and what are some of the opportunities? I work for a regional secretariat, the Cartagena Convention. So what that is a collaboration among all of the 28 governments within the wider Caribbean region. And collectively, senior government officials within these 28 countries said that more needed to be done on Sargassum. And we have been trying to establish various working groups that would come together. We have a regional activity center that's based in Guadeloupe that's trying to ensure that the messages and the science about Sargassum that we have is being brought to a wider audience. Many persons are working on this, and I think one of the challenges now is collaboration. So I wanted to highlight a couple of things that have been done, and at the end of this presentation, I actually have a slide where persons can access these different resources. We came up with a short video series that focus on Sargassum, the opportunities, what you can do with it. We also looked at the issue of nutrients, and a lot of the scientists seem to think that the Sargassum influx to some degree is not only associated with climate change, but also with the increased nutrients that we have entering the Caribbean Sea. And these nutrients are coming predominantly from agrochemical runoff from agriculture, but also from untreated domestic wastewater. And then a number of other regional workshops and events are working to try to identify, is there really a link between pollution and the increases in Sargassum that we are seeing? As a result of a lot of these workshops and meetings and discussions, I thought it would be useful for this group to really highlight what are some of the messages that have come out of a lot of these dialogues. I mean, yes, I'm with UNEP. We do very well at pulling together people and having workshops and meetings and discussions. But I think it's really important now to see how can we take action and what do we need. And one of the very strong messages was that this particular issue of Sargassum is not limited just to one sector. It's not only an environmental issue, it's not only a fisheries issue, it's not only a tourism or science or research. It's really important that we need to bring together different stakeholders. We need to look at multidisciplinary approaches. For example, not just looking at the environmental science, but also the economics of it, as well as the social impact. It needs to be inclusive. For many of us in small islands, Sargassum is going to impact us one way or the other, and therefore the importance of engaging the general public, journalists, youth. Research is needed. It's still needed. And as much as sometimes we have enough research to take action, we still need to do the research in terms of the sources, the impact, the potential uses. And Francisco highlighted some of the concerns that we might have. For example, if we use Sargassum that has high levels of arsenic. And therefore, the science is really going to be important to inform what type of responses, what types of solutions should we be taking. More and more, we see a number of publications from our own universities in the region, from our own scientists. I think that's a great effort. I think we need more of that science and more scientists. But now we need to find a way of documenting that, transforming that into lessons learned, into experiences, into things that media and journalists can actually now share with the general public. And in doing so, to recognize that we do have a lot of indigenous knowledge, we have citizen science, and that means that this effort and efforts like this, I'm really happy to be part of, because this is not a one-off thing. We can't just say we're going to do one webinar or one workshop or one video and think that everyone is going to be suddenly aware. If there is a connection with pollution, it means that we also have to look at all aspects. How are we going to do the necessary training and technology upgrades, including financing, that will reduce on the impacts that on the actual excess of Sargassum. And here, honestly, is a little bit of the dilemma, because for business and entrepreneurs to get involved in the industry, in a way, they also want to be assured that there's almost going to be a constant supply of sargassum. And it's difficult to predict that. And you've seen that in some years, we've really had very, very serious incidences on our beaches. In some years, it's affected more the Eastern Caribbean. In other years, it's affecting more the Gulf of Mexico. I would say now it seems to be affecting everywhere. I've seen some of the pictures from the different countries. But again, how do we predict and how do we set up businesses that are going to utilize it? And we also have to look at our policies, our laws, the typical things that we look at in a government framework. So this is really, I think, a good opportunity to re-emphasize that a call to action and really to encourage journalists, youth, all stakeholders that there is an interest in this now. We've recently had this very big conference in Montreal. We have a number of these new global declarations and these targets and so on. But this is an opportunity for us in the Caribbean to really take action on the ground. Many donors are providing funding for projects, for activities at the national level, at the community level. How can we maximize on those to build some success stories? How can we build on the research? A lot of the research that you heard mentioned from Francisca. How can we learn from the entrepreneurs that are using sargassum in other countries? How can we transfer that to other countries in the region? And really the importance of everyone staying engaged. So this was the final slide I wanted to share that I'm happy to share with everyone. These are some of the links to some of the recent videos, particularly the video series covers aspects such as what is sargassum? How can you solve it? What are some of the monitoring? What is the value of sargassum? And in this particular video, part 4, you will see some examples of some of the entrepreneurs who have also been involved in doing something with sargassum. And then a number of other more papers, documents, studies. You see the one about sargassum and turning a crisis into an opportunity. How do you target civil society? How do you target entrepreneurs? How do you target women? So there are a number of these tools that are available, a number of these publications, and I really encourage everyone. The links are there, and I'm happy to share with that afterwards. And yes, I just want to end by again thanking the organizers for allowing me just to share a few of those perspectives, and really congratulations and looking forward to continued efforts in engaging journalists, the general public, young persons on really an issue which is so important for all of us in the region. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Christopher, for sharing that information and specifically, highlighting some of the areas that journalists can really kind of take their stories, directions that journalists can take their stories in, because it's really important that we don't just focus on the fact that this is a crisis, but there are different elements there. There are different levels there. There are different nuances. So how can we approach this as a holistic situation in the Caribbean, and not just, and I like the fact that you also mentioned the what's happening across the Atlantic and sort of seeing it as an opportunity for collaboration with those on the other side of the ocean. So before I kind of move on, actually we'll be taking questions, but before I kind of move on into the next speaker, I was hoping to just hear a little bit from you, specifically in terms of that relationship or that experience that you have working with other people outside of the region who are sort of dealing with this issue. How would you describe that willingness to sort of have collaboration and work together across the region with people in the Caribbean or the Caribbean region?
I think it's a very important question, and I would say that people are really very interested in that sort of collaboration for a number of different reasons. Now, there are some regions, and I will tell you that when you ask them about sargassum, they look at you with kind of a blank look and wonder, what's the problem? Because in their region, it's not an issue. But when you talk now to even people in Europe and in France, because of the presence of Martinique and Guadeloupe and the islands in the Caribbean, they are very sensitized to the issue of sargassum. As I mentioned, if you talk to our regional seas, there's actually a regional seas office, very much like the one here in Jamaica. There's one in Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire. And when you talk to them, they are having the identical challenges that we are having here in the region. So I think there's a great opportunity for us to exchange experience, exchange best practices, exchange lessons learned, but in a way that's kind of happening at this sort of technical level. But I would say there's also a similar opportunity for exchange among journalists, among youth, among community-based organizations. So willingness is there, but we have to find those mechanisms where we can collaborate.
Yeah, definitely. So I would encourage our journalists and our storytellers that are listening to, reach outside of the Caribbean and see what's happening and how we kind of sort of, draw references and see how we can collaborate with those who are telling stories as well outside of the region, So that's going to be very important. Thank you so much, Christopher, for your presentation and for sharing with us. I'm going to move on next to our next guest speaker for today. And we're going to hear next from Dean Morris. And Dean is the co-founder of Key Farms, which since 2014, Dean has been working with the environmental and farming, focused startups. His current focus is developing sustainable mariculture methodologies for fisherfolk communities and sensitizing the wider Jamaica and Caribbean on ocean farming strategies. Dean supervises the daily operations, leads key initiatives, and implements company-wide strategies. He's also the point person for the network of fisherfolk and is in charge of all aspects in regards to stakeholder management. So, Dean, we are very excited to hear from you today. And the floor is yours.
I think Dean is having some challenges turning on his mic. So he might. There you go. Okay.
All right, guys.
Yes, there we go.
Hi, guys. Can you hear and see my presentation?
Yes.
All right, lovely. All right, so I'm Dean Morris. I am one of the co-founders of Key Farms. And let me just go into what Key Farms is real quick. So we are an ocean farm and network based in Jamaica, focused on carbon removal through seaweed and oyster cultivation and ocean habit restoration. So historically, Jamaica, like the rest of the Caribbean, has played a pretty defensive position with respect to environmental protection, leading to like very heavy regulations and protections. Carbon removal through mariculture activities can help create a more active climate change action environment while encouraging the development of the blue economy in the region. So we started off with a mandate by saying, hey, fisherfolk communities are experiencing depleting fish stocks due to overfishing and climate change. They needed an alternate method of income to support their livelihoods. So we started to teach them how to grow seaweed. The seaweed that we're teaching them how to grow is called Gracillara, which is most Jamaicans would call iris moss. Iris moss is pretty popular in like Ireland and Jamaica. And a part of that is, they just needed a source of income. We also help them to grow oyster at scale, and it provides entry into an export market for them while facilitating the capture of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And now fisherfolk also have the opportunity to help restore the environment and earn sustainable income. So our business model relies very heavily on the sale of seaweed based products such as for food, for fertilizer, and we're looking into going to biofuels, etc. Oysters is also used as a biomass for biochar creation too. which I will go into a little bit. And Key Farms, we are intending to develop our own farm, and we want to continue to train other fisher folk on our methods and set up our own ocean farms throughout the Caribbean. And it's a really nice headshot of my team. So the Sargassum issue, and everybody here, this is where we all come together. Sargassum has been around forever. It's one of the first things that Christopher Columbus saw when he was leaving the Sargasso Sea. And because of the incidence of high blooms over the past 13 years, we've been having, well, Jamaica has been having it rough. And I would say we have been getting reduced fish catch because of the excessive accumulation of sargassum in the fishing areas. It has been causing the same fisher folk that we've been helping to, it's just been a big problem for them. It has been clogging the fishing nets, the lines, the propellers, and it's making it difficult for the fisher folk to even catch fish. And the presence of the dense sargassum mats can also create physical barriers, making it harder to navigate the waters in these affected areas. It also is a big habitat alteration. It serves as like a floating habitat for a lot of marine organisms. While this can attract fish to get food, it leads to challenges in the availability and the distribution of the same fish populations. Some species of the fish benefit from the shelter and food provided by the sargassum, while others are negatively impacted if their preferred habitats are altered. And the biggest one is the economic impact. The fisher folk who rely on fishing as their primary source of income are very much heavily affected by sargassum. So the heavy fish catches due to the presence of sargassum can result in large financial losses and for the individual fishers and the fishing communities. The economic impact can be extremely severe in areas where fishing is the main livelihood and where sargassum accumulations are extensive. So what we tried to do at Key Farms, although we started saying that we were growing seaweed or growing it for, we're growing it to help fisher folk, because the sargassum problem is super pervasive. We said the best method or the best thing that we could do to help fisher folk is to just kind of figure out ways that we could use the sargassum. As Francesca and Christopher pointed out earlier, sargassum is very high. It has a lot of, it attracts metals. And most of the metals that it attracts is like really bad for humans, so arsenic, and it's just really bad. We have been figuring out ways to use sargassum without having to rely without having to worry about the arsenic, and couple methods that came about. One, turning it into cardboard. And so cardboard or paper is pretty, because of the process used to make cardboard, it breaks down the arsenic. Or we can just use it we can create it in such a way that it removes the arsenic out of the process, so it doesn't affect whoever is making it. And it's sustainable because it's a renewable resource that like naturally occurs in the ocean. We use it as a raw material for cardboard production could reduce the reliance on traditional sources of pulp, such as trees. And we can, because we're using it, it helps to conserve forests and promote a more sustainable approach to manufacturing. It also is very abundant. The blooms have been occurring more frequently in our region, so it's leading to challenges related to the accumulation on our coastlines. By using the sargassum as a raw material for the cardboard, it could offer a potential solution for managing these large blooms. and it's cost effective. It's pretty much free. We just have to get it. And it has a lot of the carbon sequestration properties. We can utilize this, and we can utilize it to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and contribute to mitigating climate change. So another two products we can also do is hydrochar and biochar. Biochar is basically a special type of charcoal made from burning plant material like wood or sargassum in a controlled manner. It's basically you just burn it without a lot of oxygen, and it has some holes in it, and these tiny holes give biochar a large surface area, which is helpful for like trapping and holding things like water, nutrient, and helpful microbes. The only big issue with biochar and its sister product, hydrochar, is that both of them, they need a pyrolyzer. The pyrolyzer is pretty expensive. There's not many in the Caribbean. They're mostly in the United States or in Europe or in China. So they're very expensive machinery to have. So we don't really have any in the Caribbean right now. But it's something that as soon as we get one in Jamaica or in the Caribbean, we can start turning sargassum into this. And with biochar and hydrochar, it's useful in farming and gardening. When biochar is like added to the soil, it can make the soil healthier. It helps the soil to retain the water, the nutrients, and helpful microbes, which can make plants grow better. Biochar can also stay in the soil for a very long time, and it kind of acts like a sponge for carbon. So it soaks up all the carbon, which is very good for the environment. I'll skip to the hydrochar. So hydrochar and biochar, as I said, the difference between hydrochar is just that they use water in that process when they're turning it into biochar. So they both look the same way, just hydrochar is a little bit wetter. So hydrochar have more potential. Both of them have potential applications where, as I said, soil amendment is one, but hydrochar can be used for energy production through either combustion or gasification process. It can be used for heat and power generation, contributing to a more sustainable energy mix. And it's also using carbon sequestration, as I said before, by converting the sargassum into hydrogen or biochar. The carbon can be effectively stored and sequestered over an extended period, helping to offset greenhouse gases emissions. So as we're a small company, we just started into this journey. For this year, we're working with the fisherfolk communities in just helping us to collect the sargassum, and we've started to raise funds to build a factory to process the sargassum and then to sell the cardboard that we're processing to companies, local companies in Jamaica, in the region, to use in their endeavors. So that's who we are, Key Farms. We run a mariculture farm out in Portland, Jamaica. And our big goals is to help create the ocean network and to help 1,000 fisherfolk move away from system fishing. We want to sequester 100 million tons of carbon from the ocean and atmosphere by 2035. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. And yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that information with us, Dean. I'm sure that we will have some questions coming in soon. So I want to say thank you to everyone in their presentations. Were really important in helping us to focus on the important messaging that's needed to amplify this issue across the region and beyond. So now we want to hear from our audience, and I'm hoping that we have some questions that will come in from our audience. So if you have any questions or comments, please don't be afraid to send it in our comments section in the chat, and we'll be taking a look at those questions there and directing them to the relevant speakers. For now, though, I do have a question that I'd like to ask, and that is in terms of what are some of the long-term impacts that the sargassum problem could have on the Caribbean, and how can we mitigate these impacts? And I would like to ask a question from of Franziska specifically.
So what are some of the lessons? I
Hello?
think, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, yeah.
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry, I just had
What are some of the long-term impacts that you think the sargassum problem could have on the Caribbean?
Oh, the long-term impacts. Well, my colleagues already say that the beaches and like the water quality in Mexico, like we never get that really clear water we used to have before. Like, because even at the times when the sargassum isn't there, you still have more muddy water. Somehow the sand comes up big and quicker. So there are those type of impacts. I think there can be long-term health impacts as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's just a lot of, yeah, and of course the costs, like collecting sargassum is very expensive. And yeah, and you lose the sand when you do it. So you have a lot of costs, and people end up not going again to the Caribbean for their vacation if they had sargassum there the first time. So you lose business. But I hope that we're not only gonna have negative long-term impacts. I hope that it's not a story that ends in the Caribbean losing tourism and having impacts on seagrasses and coral reefs and their coastal environments degrading, but that we actually find ways to collect most of the sargassum and make products, and that the long-term story of sargassum is that we had like maybe 10, maybe 15 years of struggle, followed by many, many years of prosperity due to a new blue economy. So that's my hope, that we can turn it around and make products out of it and turn it into, yeah, a gold or an opportunity.
Yeah, I love that narrative. Thank you so much, Franziska, for sharing that. And the next question that we have, actually, I think it's good to ask this one, or direct this question to Christopher. And Alejandra is asking, what are some examples of sharing lessons between countries that you think have been successful in dealing with the issue? So what are some success stories that you can share with us?
Thanks so much. And I can think of a few. I can think of first of all, when we first started having sargassum come onto the beaches, there were lots of questions in terms of what should we do? How should we pick it up? Should we use shovels? Should we use tractors? Should we use, and it very much varied from country to country. And what we saw were different organizations, people who had the experience, the scientific knowledge on measures of collection which had the least impact as possible. As was mentioned before, it's not the ideal because you are going to have some form of beach erosion, but there are ways in which you can collect the sargassum on beaches that minimizes the damage to your beach and minimizes erosion. So what we saw was that was shared among different countries. And based on that, then countries developed their own guidelines and criteria for collection. I think some of the efforts now to come up with, I don't want to say sargassum prediction models, but scientists have collaborated in terms of how do you predict where the sargassum is going to go to, so that at least you can have some preventative measures in place. And I realize that more and more countries are now using some of these platforms and these online tools that allow persons now to monitor and detect. And I think that the final way in which I'm seeing the sharing of lessons, as you know, the Caribbean persons kind of look at what the other one is doing. And I think the examples that we've heard in terms of the entrepreneurial development, I see that as something that's very much being replicated and considered. So we had, I believe, an entrepreneur in St. Lucia who was doing work on Sargassum. You heard of the work in Barbados. I'm right here in Jamaica, and I have not had the opportunity to visit my colleague there, Dean, in Port Antonio. So I do have it on my to-do list. But I think that's the other aspect that we've seen, learning from other entrepreneurial efforts in the region. Over.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Christopher. And I think another question that I would like to ask is actually direct this question to Dean. Dean, do you think that the sort of model that you've taken in terms of making, positive out of it, do you think that this is something that can be easily replicated, or are there many challenges that you've faced in sort of setting up this business model? And can you share with us what that process was like for you?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Yes, there are some challenges in setting up a model like ours, because it's not, I would like to say a lot of it is you kind of figuring it out. And then although a lot of really cool stuff are happening, the issue is not very much, we can't read in to make it available for a lot of people without significant investment. So like Francesca had pointed out that there are a lot of people using it in very innovative ways, but I did not know a lot of them, especially about like the shoes and about the host, etc. But it's hard to scale to make it into a viable product or into a viable company. So that's a big issue for entrepreneurs in the Caribbean, and just lack of investment, and also lack of research. A lot of the entrepreneurs are kind of just figuring it out as we go along, and learning as we go along right now.
All right, thank you so much, Dean, for taking that question. And we're going to take one more question, and I'm going to leave this one kind of open to any of our speakers who might like to address it. And it comes from Sam, and he's asking, how are various governments in the region addressing the health implications of the Sargassum influxes? Who would like to pick up this question?
I'll just answer a small part of that. I know Christopher can probably give more detailed one, but I have noticed that the governments of the Caribbean have been working on monitoring and creating early warning systems. And they've also been doing a lot of public health advisories and beach cleaning and removal. And I think that's a big part of addressing it from the government point of view.
Yeah, definitely. Christopher, would you like to add to this?
Yeah. I can recall some experiences that took place when Antigua and Barbuda had some really, really heavy influxes of Sargassum actually had to result. What was some of the reactions by the government was in terms of, I think as Dean referred to, a lot of public health messages, a lot of outreach and awareness in terms of environmental health. I think they even got some small, hydrogen sulfide testing kits to sort of see what the exposure was like, etc. But I think if we think about it a little more than just the health impacts from the actual deterioration or degradation of the sargassum itself, Francisca did raise the question about the arsenic and the potential if we use sargassum as fertilizer. And I would say there probably needs to be a little more work done there to do some pre-screening of our sargassum before it is used for certain types of uses to ensure that we are really not creating another problem if we don't manage it correctly.
Yeah, I know I've talked to a lot of companies who make fertilizers, and a lot of them are screening their end product for national standards, and they have developed proprietary ways to get rid of the arsenic. And so I forgot to ask, and sometimes they're very vague about, well, if you get out this organic arsenic out, where do you put the arsenic? Like, is that going into wastewater? Is this taken care of properly? I know there's a mom and pops company in Tobago who makes fertilizer by fermentation. And when we ask them, they don't have a means yet they don't have the money to check their fertilizer for arsenic, so they don't know. However, they told us that the fertilizers used currently on Tobago are like fertilizers that, for example, in Europe are already banned. So that's why they said, well, it's probably better than the stuff that people are using right now. But of course, if universities who could check for arsenic or do this type of research could work with especially those small companies who don't have the funds to do the lab work, that would be really useful, I think.
Also, I think the fermentation method has very low NPK. So whenever we started to look at fertilizer and animal feed as one of the potential uses of sargassum, but we had to kind of move away from that because it was we tested ours, and it was really high in arsenic, and so we had to just say we can't go forward like this, and we had to let it go. But I think it's up to the producer to test it, because they're the ones selling it, and you can't really put something out into the market without testing it. Especially if arsenic is super duper dangerous, so it's something that we have to test for always.
And by the way, we don't know yet if it's organic or inorganic arsenic that is in the sargassum. And some of it is very dangerous and some of it is actually not dangerous. So while we have to be very careful and should take all the arsenic out, we also need to do more research on finding out if it's actually the dangerous arsenic that is in the sargassum.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that exactly. So, and it points again to the fact that there are so many different levels to this discussion. And this is just a start. So I'm hoping, as Christopher would have mentioned earlier, that, it's not just a one-off situation or one-off discussion, but it's something that we can continue and just continue sharing the knowledge that is, because we know knowledge sharing is it has historically been a problem for us in the Caribbean. So specifically, our audience, we are made up of storytellers, communicators, journalists, media professionals, and one of the main purposes of having these monthly sessions is to really get that information out there to those who need it to help tell the stories that need to be told. So I want to say really thank you so much to our speakers for joining us, for joining this community hangout. We have truly enjoyed this exceptional discussion, and I hope that I know that we'll meet again very soon, because it's something that we're continuing to do as we continue to build on this climate justice community that we're building a climate tracker, and we're looking at climate justice from many different angles, not just not just the base level, but different. Climate justice is something that's pervasive. So we're looking at the different ways that it can be applied, from the economy to society to human rights issues and everything in between. So we are really happy to have you here with us to discuss this specific issue. And before we end, I would like to encourage everyone to join our growing and engaging Caribbean community on Facebook. You just look for Caribbean Climate Trackers and you'll find us. And we also have a great newsletter that goes out every week, where we focus on one specific climate justice story that was written by one of our fellows. Currently, we have fellows that represent a lot of different Caribbean countries. Last week, we heard from the Bahamas, and so we're really excited to hear from each of our different storytellers that are telling climate justice issues from their country. So if you want to sign up for that as well, you can go to our website, climatetracker.org, and you'll find out more information about that. And being a part of the community, you really get the opportunity to network and share ideas with extremely talented journalists from across the region, as well as bridge that gap between communicators and the technical, those that are involved in the technical and scientific elements of this whole movement. So that is what we want to do, and I hope that you're excited to be a part of this community and collaborate and discuss climate justice and climate-related issues and potential solutions. All right, so you can also interact with me one-on-one in these groups, as well as our communications officer, Yamlek, who is here as well, behind the scenes helping me out with this session. So I want to thank again everyone who's joined us. Before we leave, of course, I'd like to take a group picture. So this is just for, if I don't take this group picture, Yamlek is not going to talk to me ever again. So if you can just put your video on, and we can just get a couple shots, that would be really great. So I think everyone who's online with us can actually just turn on your video for a second.
Did we allow everyone to turn their cameras? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, it would be just a quick thing. I'm going to take the picture anyway, as we are. But if somebody wants to open their cameras, that would be great. So another one just in case anyone blinked. I think that works. Well, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you especially to our speakers for sharing the two sides of the coin, right? And I really hope that I know that you've inspired our audience to tell the stories that need to be told, which is what we, at the end of the day, really want to do. So thank you, and I hope that everyone has a good evening, a good night. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.